the maximum you can have is 6 months.
Oh, is it? Right, okay.
Yeah, in the maternity law. So
Splendid. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our latest Connor Home event. My name is William Atkinson. I'm the assistant editor here at Conservative Home. And welcome to our event today, which is Digital Britain, how delivering better connectivity can drive growth and opportunities, which I'm very pleased to say we're doing in partnership with City Fibre. Delivering, attracting and utilising the significant investment in digital infrastructure that we've had over the last few years has been a Conservative success story, dare I say it, and obviously at this conference we're looking for one or two of those. We have a target of trying to reach 100% full fibre by 2030. We're already 3/4 of the way there. But significant issues remain for both consumers, for regulators, and for anybody like myself who has spent the morning trying to grapple with the hotel Wi-Fi in an effort to try and get an article up. We can see the importance of good quality broadband, and I hope today that the Minister and the rest of our panellists are able to delve into this issue further. So without further ado, I shall introduce them. To my right we have Michelle Donnellan, the Secretary of State for Science, Technology and Innovation, and the MP for Chippenham. And we also have Ed Taylor, who is the Director of Government and Public Affairs at City Fibre. And to my left, they're not necessarily politically, who knows, we have Alan Nixon, who's the Head of Tech at Onward. And right next to me, we have, is it Rocio?
Rocio.
Rocio. I was never good at language at school. The Director of Advocacy at Which. I'm going to ask all the panellists to give a 3-minute sort of opening speech to outline their approach to this particular issue. And then I will ask a few questions of them. And we will have something of a panel discussion. And then I'll throw it open to the audience for any of you who might have questions. And now I realise that this may be a mixture of lay and sort of particularly invested individuals in this particular topic area. So I ask if some of my panellists start using some technical jargon, that they may be able to explain it for any of our viewers who aren't necessarily on the level. But anyway, I would like to ask Michelle to kick us off.
Yep, thank you very much, and thank you, Conservative Home, for hosting today. I was particularly excited about this one because I think connectivity really is key to growth and spreading opportunities, and I think the Conservative Party is the natural party of growth. And when we think about digital infrastructure, really, it's as important as when we laid the canals, as the national grid, and other infrastructure projects in the past, like railways, etc. And so this is a really important conversation that's often overlooked as well. It's not the sexiest of political conversations, shall we say, to get traction all the time. But when we look at some of the figures, they're really quite remarkable in terms of what we've achieved working hand in hand with industry over the years. Back in 2019, gigabit broadband was only out to 6% of people premises. Now it is 77% of premises. That's quite staggering in that short space of time. And obviously there's further work to do, but I think we've made considerable progress. Connectivity happens in terms of premises every 13 seconds, so you can just imagine how many premises will be connected within this one fringe itself. But behind all these stats, really it's about what is that doing for people's lives? Well, what it's doing is it's enabling them to work at home, which is particularly important post-pandemic. It's enabling them to access medtech or edtech at home, and crucially, it's enabling them to be connected socially and preventing things like loneliness. And when I look back at the pandemic, actually, having that connectivity was quite literally a lifeline for many people. But what I think is really special about this story is that we did it in a Conservative way. And if we remember back at the last general election, the Labour Party manifesto said that they were going to roll this out fully funded by the state. Now, what that would have meant wouldn't have just meant a bigger bill to the taxpayer. It would have actually have slowed things down, is the reality. And what we did was we worked with industry in partnership. Yes, we tried to remove some of the barriers and the obstacles, and some of them are still there, and I'm sure that we'll get onto that. But also what we've done is we've said, let's target government investment in those areas where the business case doesn't really work for businesses, and we should be filling those gaps rather than the state intervening in every scenario. And that's what we've done, I think a very conservative, pro-business approach. Yes, we've invested money. We've invested £5 billion, but we've also relied on the expertise, the talent, the ingenuity and the hard work of our industry. And they haven't let us down by any stretch of the imagination. And City Fibre, who I'm sure will go into great details of their own work, but they've done an astonishing amount of work. 3 million premises, in fact, adding 500,000 of those since January alone. So they are a key part of the success story here. We've also done a great deal of work when it comes to mobile connectivity, again, using that same model of working hand in hand with business, with the shared rural network. And yes, there is a lot of work to be done in this space. And I think in the Q&A will probably come out those challenges and those opportunities. But when we look at what we've managed to achieve in the last few years alone, pandemic and other things aside, it really has added to the connectivity of our nation. And it's easy to forget how important this is to our economy. There's one stat that's particularly stuck in my mind, and it's that rural areas contribute $250 billion to the economy every year. Now, that's quite remarkable when you think about it. Now, if we're connecting rural areas as well as urban areas, it means that we're actually adding to our economy and to our potential growth. And that's why throughout this story, we weren't just focusing on urban areas. We were also making sure that we were identifying those hard-to-reach areas and those areas that were potentially going to be left behind to make sure that people could live and work at home, that they could have rural businesses, and that we could allow them to succeed and the opportunity could flourish no matter where people were based.
Thank you very much, Secretary of State. I shall now turn to Alan, Head of Tech and Onward, to give his thoughts on this particular matter.
Yeah, thanks. So when I think about digital connectivity and how it can drive growth across the economy, I think I look at it from two different perspectives. One is access, which is I think what we're going to speak about mostly today. And actually Onward recently had a report out called Troubled Waters, which looked at coastal communities. And one of the things that we found was that pre-2008, the coastal communities' productivity was running roughly about the same as the rest of the economy. Since then, that's dropped down and it's running at about 10% less productive than the rest of the country. And there are many, many factors in this. It's not to say that this is all because of digital connectivity, but that is a part of it. If you look at, for instance, download speeds in East Midlands coast is 47% worse than inland in East Midlands. The East Coast as well, 19% lower too. So just as the Secretary of State said there as well, there's a lot of work still to be done out in these sort of more rural communities, but the impact that we can have on them, not just for their livelihood, but to generate across the economy growth is really, really important as well. The second part that I spend more of my time thinking of when I'm at Onward is how it can enable the science superpower agenda more broadly as well. And I think, first of all, the government needs to be commended for creating this Science, Innovation and Technology Department, because previously, as I'm sure you know, broadband and digital connectivity was within DCMS, and then and we had like R&D, science, and lots of the other kind of science superpowery stuff was over in BASE, and the business department. That's been brought together, which I think is a really, really good thing. We wrote about it Onward as well. We've written about how this is a good thing. There's lots more, I think, to be done, and lots more reforms are needed. This should be the first step, but the sort of underlying fact is that bringing these two things together, where we've got a Secretary of State who's worried about digital connectivity more broadly and worried about the science superpower and how that can generate growth long term, is a very, very good thing, because the two do go part and parcel together. I mean, you could rattle off loads of different technologies. The easiest one, I guess, is AI. It's going absolutely gangbusters right now. I'm sure you've all seen. Even just a few days ago, ChatGPT have created this thing where it's got a visual aspect to it now, where you can take a picture of it and it turns it into code. These things are game-changing. The UK has a hugely, hugely strong tech sector and AI sector, but digital connectivity and compute within that is going to be absolutely critical. So having something here where we're worried about digital connectivity driving the science superpower agenda is mission critical there, and I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
No, that's very interesting, and very interesting to sort of match it with the broader remit of this new department, which is something I'm sure that we'll come back to later. But before that, Rocky.
Thank you. As everybody have said up to now, connectivity is key for growth, but also key for all of us to engage in our society. And I think that this government have made a lot of progress in the rollout of full fiber and gigabit capable broadband with the investment of the private sector. So I think there have been an amazing amount of increase in the areas that we are covering in the UK. So for example, for full fiber, we have half of the UK already covered by full fiber networks, and we have more, as the Secretary of State was saying, more than 70% cover us on the gigabit capable broadband. Now, the challenge is the take-up of that better connection. At the moment, the take-up of full fiber is where it is available is only 25%. And the take-up of gigabit capable broadband is around 38%. So there are some challenges here. It's a challenging also for the investment perspective, because the providers and the government want people to take up these connections to make sure that we realize the economic benefit of this. However, there are some barriers, and these are no new barriers that we just discovered. In 2020, the government asked the consumer organization that I represent, CBI, and the Federation of Small Businesses to put together a take-up advisory group to look at the barriers that people face in taking these connections. That include organizations representing the industry, the Good Things Foundations, and the regulator. And we identified 3 key barriers that I hope that we are going to discuss today. One is people are not aware of what we are talking about when we are talking about full fiber, gigabit capable broadband. There is a lot of terminology out there that is very confusing. Many consumers already have connections that they say, this is what I need. Why I will ask or agree to switch to a new network that will require someone to come to my home, to make something to my home, to be able to get access to that connection where the connection that I have is working for me. And the second area was hassle. That issue that to move to the full fiber network, we will need people to come to their homes and explain to people that actually they need to disconnect from the current connection and connect to the new one. We need to find ways to explain to people about the benefits of better connections. And that is why we put 3 key recommendations as a part of the advisory group. One, we need to have an information campaign that is coordinated by the government, with consumer organizations, with the industry, that explain to people what this connection is and what are the benefits of these new and better connections. The second one is terminology. As I said, there is a lot of terminology out there, and many of you will be experts in this industry, but consumers are very busy people and get very confused about super fast, ultra fast. They thought that they have fiber, and now we are telling them that they don't have fiber because what they have is fiber to the cabinet. So as a part of our recommendation, we ask Ofcom to work with the industry to make sure that we have a terminology that the whole industry use consistently when they engage with consumers. And there is a consultation out there, and we are waiting for the outcome of that consultation. But we also need consumer cases. We need to explain to people what is that they are going to get. Even if you are happy with this connection, what additional benefits you will get from this connection. And it's not only about speed, it's also about reliability. Again, there need to be consistency in how we talk about this with consumers so they understand it. And the final thing that I will say is, given that for what people use their connection today, many consumers are happy for what they have. There need to be some kind of incentives. So another proposal that we put forward was the employee discount benefit scheme that work like this cycle to work scheme that, incentivize people to take these better connections. And overall, we need to be honest to people about the benefits not only for them, but also the benefits for the country, and make sure that any pricing structures that we put there with on these new services are very clear, and people know how much they are going to pay when they sign up a contract. At the moment, for example, we have practice where we have in-contract price increases linked to inflation, to CPI, RPI plus a markup, and actually consumers don't know what will be the total cost of that contract. And research that we have done said that only 5% of those of consumers can get a broad estimate of how much that will be, the total cost of their contracts. So I will stop here. I hope we will discuss in more detail some of these recommendations.
I'm sure we will. And I think, thank you very much, Rocky, for that, for giving the consumer's perspective. But then coming at it from the angle of the UK's second largest full fibre provider, if I've got that right. I love a stat. Ed, what do you think the previous panelists have already sort of elucidated that you'd like to expand, and what is full fibre's particular, City Fibre's particular take on this?
Well, I think I'm confident hearing what everybody said. If you want the pre-conference bun fight, it's not going to happen in this room. There's a lot of agreement on things that I've heard so far. City Fibre is one of those largest companies you've probably never heard of. We're basically building a £4 billion fibre network in the UK from scratch. We've already connected, as Michelle said, 3 million homes. And again, we're spending tens of millions of pounds a week, basically laying fibre in the most convenient way as possible. But the beauty of our network is it's going to be there for 50 to 60 years. Essentially, the government and consumers talk about gigabit connectivity. But without having to dig the roads up again, all you're going to have to do is move a few boxes around inside one of our fibre exchanges, potentially move something in somebody's home without causing all the disruption, and we're already confident we can get 10 gigabit connectivity through our network. I think some of the issues of why connectivity is important, I think, are sort of well understood, but I think it's worth reiterating them and how much it touches on the UK in general. So again, I think the UK would never be able to achieve levelling up without decent digital infrastructure. Again, there's a lot of focus when people talk about infrastructure, particularly on roads, trains, planes, but people often forget what's underneath their feet. Again, as the UK hopes to become a world leader in AI, without the digital infrastructure underpinning that, is never going to happen. I'm very proud to work for a company that's we can go to many towns across the country. I'm originally from Blackpool. I can go and speak to the local council there and tell them that we're investing £60 million. Places like Blackpool are suffering from a lack of basic infrastructure, and we're here addressing that. Again, I think Rosia from Which talked about consumers, and I think it's easy to forget actually delivering those consumer benefits is actually one of the trickiest and knottiest issues we face from a public policy perspective. She talked about the Gigabit Take-Up Advisory Group, GigaTag, as you'll hear it commonly referred to, which identified some of the challenges for consumers, particularly confusion around the technology, and there's some areas about that I'd like to talk about later on, ranging from misleading advertising through to just basic understanding of what the technology that now is at their doorstep. I think, again, the important thing as we sort of go forward in this is remembering that actually the government has presided over a success story. Essentially, 2017, the government acknowledged that we were well behind our international competitors in terms of our connectivity. It essentially created a framework that promoted across our industry 25 to 30 billion of commercial money into the UK. And as I say, this phenomenal success to get from 6 to 77% within the space of 5-6 years is something I think the government can be very proud of.
Splendid. What we'll do now is I'll ask the panel a few questions, and then we'll turn it open to you guys in the audience. But first of all, Minister, it strikes me that there are two different elements in competition here, which is that clearly that the government has done very well to roll this out so quickly. But as Rocio highlighted, there's a problem if we're rolling it out as quickly as this, but nobody's actually taking it up. And so can I ask, what is the government doing to sort of clarify the benefits of gigabit broadband, or gigabit 5, sorry, to the general public? And then how would you best sort of expostulate to somebody who is sceptical that they've got the time, the ability to install this, why they should be doing so, and just how vital it is?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that's the challenge across the board in terms of the areas that my department deals with, especially when you've got issues like cost of living crisis, etc., and people are quite rightly very focused on the here and now and the today. What we're trying to excite people about and get them to think about as well is how can technology and how can science transform your life, not just today, not just tomorrow, but in the future. And so I think that's the broader mission of my department. So when I bang on about how we're going to get Britain to be a science and technology superpower by 2030, some people will sit back and say, well, why on earth is that a priority for me at the moment? And so we have to, in all that we do, explain the tangible benefits, because it does translate to people being able to get better jobs, better paid jobs, for more industry to be able to come to their local community, for more inward investment coming to the UK, and us not losing out on that. And we have to sell that, and not just us, but also working with industry and the third sector as well. I think it's incumbent upon all of us, and we've identified future telecoms as one of our 5 critical technologies. That's how important we think this agenda is in our mission to getting to be a science and technology superpower. So absolutely, you're spot on. Everybody on the panel was spot on. It isn't just about providing the connectivity, it's also about ensuring that people then take it up. And that is one of the problems that we did identify in some of these harder to reach areas. And that's why we altered the way that we do it, working with BD UK, having a voucher scheme so that people have to register in advance of it coming to their area, so they're almost hooked into getting it. And so we have thought about this, but I think there's more we need to do. There's more we need to do in partnership with people like Which.
Splendid. One could say it's almost as important an infrastructure project as many others that we're not allowed to currently name. But Rocky, coming back to the point that you were making, what more can be done to ensure that consumers do actually feel able and indeed empowered to be able to take up this infrastructure? I mean, Michelle has outlined there a few of the elements that the government is putting in place to do so, but what more at Which do you think that we need to see?
Well, first, as I was saying, we need to have one terminology that everyone uses consistently. So you as a consumer, you probably heard that you have fiber many years ago, but you didn't. You have fiber to the cabinet. Now, when we are talking about full fiber, we are talking about fiber to the premise. So it's important that when we talk about full fiber, we really mean full fiber, and the consumer is clear of that. I think that there is work that the industry and the government need to do also to explain, to put some kind of user case that explain why this technology is better for those consumers that need that level of speed and reliability. And I also think that we need to be, the industry need to be very careful when they switch consumers to the new network. You need to explain to the consumer what is going to happen if you switch. And then you need, as an industry, you need to make sure that you give them a very good experience. It cannot be that you get disconnected to your current network and then you have to wait days to get connected to this new network. Because I will tell you something. People will not tell you, your friends will not tell you, oh, I have a brilliant switch to full fiber this week. They will not tell you that. But if they have a bad experience, they definitely will tell you that and will put people off and will people in social media. So we need to make sure that the industry is really careful in those consumers that are ready to switch, they have a good experience and that help others to feel more confident about this. Clear pricing as well is very important. There are people that, as I said, they already have the connection that they need for today. So let's make sure that we are not charging them a lot more for something that they are already, they already get in terms of the service that they need.
Splendid. And Alan, both you and the Secretary of State have expressed some enthusiasm for the UK's potential role as a science superpower. Just how vital is this connectivity to achieving that goal?
Yeah, no, I mean, as I was saying earlier, it's part and parcel to it, right? So if you're wanting to start an AI company and you need to be able to get access to cloud computing data, if you're not able to get a good connection, Or if you're, for instance, then you're going to have to move somewhere where there is a good connection. That means you're going to have to uproot your life, which then again means you're having more concentrated growth in certain areas, whereas you don't want someone to be able to, if they're trying to start an AI company in Blackpool or something like that, right? You don't want them to have to feel like they have to move to somewhere. So it's not just about the growth itself, but it's about like basically allowing these people to be able to, like start their own business, do something really innovative, and not have to go to London, for instance, in order to do that.
Splendid. Ed, you've spoken about your own experience of sort of growing up in Blackpool and how, as the Minister has touched upon, this is essential to levelling up and to addressing those regional inequalities which remain so terribly persistent in this country. What more do you think can be done from the government's perspective to speed up this rollout, to help with that investment? And I think particularly talking about, say, planning regulations. And it also strikes me that we can be very proud that this has been done in a particularly conservative way. It's competition that's driven this. It's been a partnership between the state and the private sector, where the private sector has very much taken the lead. And speaking as somebody who is obviously from the private sector in this area, how do we get that last 25% or so? And what more can the government do to enable that?
I think actually, as we say, the government have presided over a sort of 77% connectivity now, but I think actually we're sort of entering the second phase of rollout now, and I think the government acknowledged this in the open comms consultation you did recently. I think, look, there are still some practical barriers that I can see friends and colleagues from different companies in the room where we wholeheartedly have been asking the government to implement a flexi permit regime, which, to encapsulate that quite quickly for you, if you're building in a town, say you were building down 10 streets, you'd have to get 10 permits from a local authority. Administrative burden, many companies face them, but it's almost a bit perverse that if you're building down a street, you go particularly quickly, you can't then start on the next street until the date of the next permit. What we've basically asked government to do is introduce a flexi permit regime, which would mean we go to a council saying we want to build in this area, please let us work in these 10 streets in one go. Again, you still get the same oversight in terms of quality and safety, but it's just a faster way to deliver rollout. I think, again, Rossi has particularly talked about take-up, but there is a sort of fundamental business point here as well. The reality is if you're building a network, in order to continue to expand that network, you need people infilling within it. So you have to start basically increasing your revenues in order to build. And this is why I think as we come to the sort of second phase, take-up is incredibly important, not only to City Fibre, but I think to all fibre players in the UK.
Very good. I will turn it open to the audience now, as I think we've got a flavour of each of the panellists' particular take on this issue. I'll take two questions at a time. Gentlemen, I think we've got two ladies with their hands up here at the front. Can we first have the lady sitting to my left and then the lady sitting to my right. So, Amanda, would you like to go first? Yes.
Right. Yes, I'm very pleased to hear that Blackpool's doing so well with fibre to the premises, but there is a bit of a false impression, I think, in the north that, the south's got it all. Now, I'm sorry, I live less than 20 miles from central London, and, we have no mobile mast that I can use. I put in my postcode to a when can you get fibre to the premises because I want it, and I was just told sometime between now and December 2026, which I don't think is very satisfactory. I'd like to have a bit clearer idea of why they can't tell me any time within the next 3 years. And also, this mobile mast, I did notice one has gone up now, and I went along very pleased to see it, and was told it's only for the 3 network users. So, I'm not on 3, so should I change to 3? I thought the government had done something whereby people had to, providers had to share their masts. So 2 questions there, really. One, why is it so unclear as to when I'm going to get fibre to the premises? And 2, what's this about mobile masts? Are they shared between providers or not?
Potentially, Secretary of State, could you address the latter? And if Ed, would you be willing to take the first question? But can we take the other lady's questions as well before then?
Yeah, Ali Griffiths. I just wanted to sort of build on the question about consumer versus business clarity on why they should buy into this. And what I'm not really hearing is what are the services that we're encouraging to be developed, or what are we communicating to consumers about those services? So I'm going to show my age now, but I was involved with NTL in the rollout of broadband in the UK in between 2001 and 2005, so when it first started. And the services that we were able to provide were what sold people to broadband. It wasn't necessarily just clarity on what we called it. It was why should you care? And I think where we're at the moment with hybrid working, some of those benefits of a clear Teams or Zoom call as opposed to one that's breaking out the whole time. Those types of real life examples are the things that will persuade people hopefully to buy. So it's not much of a question, but I would love to know what other services you think will make the difference, because I don't think it's only about terminology.
Rocky, are you willing to respond to that? And Secretary of State, if you also have any thoughts, that'd be interesting to hear. But first of all, let's address the previous lady's questions. Ed, would you like to go first?
It honestly depends on where you live. So again, basically in terms of rollout, what you're not seeing, there's not one basically company that's building everywhere. What you're having is competing networks across the country. And of course, each company has its own rollout plan. Like we're building like Billy-O to get to our 4 billion, to our 8 million home target. But no, not necessarily. So again, like as I say, Blackpool, for example, it's not. If you look at it, you wouldn't think, oh, that's especially easy to build. You're still digging up roads, incredibly expensive, incredibly complicated wherever you go. Again, you think, if you were to think that, for example, you might think, well, where do all the rich people live? That's really not our business model at all. For example, we don't build in Manchester, but we're building around the periphery in places like Bolton, Wigan. So it's not really a case like that. But I'll come and have a chat later and see if we are intending to build in your area.
And Secretary of State, would you like to respond?
Yes, so just on that, in terms of, you asked the question then, do you only build in the easiest areas? So we also have our scheme working with BDUK to fill in those areas where it doesn't necessarily make financial sense for companies to do it on their own. And that's why we're working in a partnership between the state and companies to fill in those particular areas, especially more rural areas. Obviously, it depends on exactly where you live as to whether those are going to be relevant to you. And then something that was said before about streetworks and trying to get more common sense into it and more less red tape and remove some of the time frames that companies are facing. What we've done there is we've said, okay, let's do a trial of that, see if it works. And if it does, then we can roll that out across the board so that we can try and condense some of these timeframes. You also mentioned mobile connectivity. One of the things that has frustrated me in this job as well is that some of the figures that you see aren't always the real life situation on the ground. I know that from my own constituency in Wiltshire, where according to the figures, it's fantastic. But I can tell you it's not always fantastic. And that's something that we're working with Ofcom to try and data cleanse those figures a little bit so that we can have more clarity on the exact picture around the company and that country, and that will require us working with a number of companies as well. And then the other lady's comments, that I completely agree that we have to properly explain the use cases and demonstrate to the public, okay, what would you need for doing what? And to the points that were raised before, as we talk about the use of AI and this transformative technology, this is really going to be in our lives much more from now. And so we do need to explain to people, okay, if you were using this particular tool, what type of connectivity level would you need and require for this to be doing that in your house or your business, etc. I think that goes back to the terminology point, doesn't it? It's one sort of campaign of trying to explain to people what exactly they need and what they currently have, because as you said before, there's a bit of confusion because people aren't always aware of what they actually have at the moment versus what they could have in the future.
Just before we go over to Rocky's response to the second question, you mentioned regulators there, Minister. Is there anything in particular you think the regulators should be doing more of? Is there something that you think they should be particularly clarifying for users, they should be making people aware of, or is there Is it a difficult? You said at the start, I think, that it's an unsexy topic, and we've already, we've debated the terminology, etc. It's something that I think, from those of us who are not as well versed in it as others, would slightly struggle to get their heads around at the start. But do you think there's something that the regulators should be doing, or particularly pushing in this area?
I think there's quite a lot. We published a very long document. If people want to, if people can't sleep tonight, they could get it on the internet. But it was called the Wireless Infrastructure Strategy earlier this year, and we made a number of requests and suggestions as well to the regulator, Ofcom. But I do think the figures, in particular, making sure that we have full clarity of the exact situation when it comes to mobile connectivity, that is particularly important.
Yes, especially I think in an issue like this where the figures are actually very impressive, it's good to publicise them. Sorry, Rocky, can we return to that lady's question?
Well, I think that the Secretary of State already answered that question. It's not only about terminology, as you say, as well, it's also about the user case. It's very challenging because for the use that we are doing, for our use today, you don't really need full fiber in some households. But this is a network that is future-proof, and we need to explain how the future will evolve and what kind of things you will be able to do with a full fiber network. And that is why, it has to be part of the same information campaign, and should be the industry with the government, we as a consumer organizations as well, explaining this consistently with the same terminology, the same user cases, to make sure that people understand what are the benefits of this. Thank you.
Very good. Can we have another couple of questions, please? We've got one gentleman at the back there and a gentleman sat on the end there. So would you like to go first?
Hello, hi, thank you. Quite informative. Understanding the cost involved in installing fibre, as Ed would know, but in my area we have 3 fibre providers, and in the last 12 months, 2 new, Gigabit and Swift, dug up the same road within a month of each other. Now, from a commercial point of view, we haven't got fibre everywhere in the UK, why doesn't the government mandatory just have a single fibre provider for an area and let the other ones who's keen to dig a road go to an area that hasn't got fibre, and then just have have Ofcom doing the job that they don't really do, but to do it, and then that would level the cost required, the billions required to dig our roads, and more people would have access to fibre.
Secretary of State and Ed, you might want to respond on that one to explain why the gentleman's plans may or may not be feasible. But the gentleman on the end?
Hi. So again, obviously you've hit the nail on the head. It's incredibly costly to dig roads up. And again, when this investment strategy was created by the government, they then asked Ofcom to look at what regulatory tools or what the regulatory environment would look like. And one of the key things they did was actually went and spoke to BT as the sort of incumbent, as it were, in the UK's telecom space, and basically said, look, you've got all these ducts and poles. In order to speed up the rollout as fast as you can, BT, what you're going to have to do is allow other companies to use them. And what they did, Ofcom then sort of regulated the ducts and poles. And essentially, it obviously makes business sense where we can to use those ducts and poles at a regulated price set by Ofcom. Because indeed, not only does it wind people up when you're digging up the road, but again, it just makes no business sense not to use existing infrastructure that's already there.
Why we've had 2 new companies come in 6 months after each other. And we've had 2 new companies come in, and this is in Berkshire, and 6 months after each other, they've just dug up the same road. It just doesn't make planning sense, it doesn't make financial sense, because then you have got 3 operators supplying broadband to a single house or whatever house, so they have a choice of 3. But from a business point of view, you're going to have 33% of actually getting a connection.
Yeah, I sort of see the point, but from the consumer's point of view, in the future, that's going to really work. Because not only are you getting the ISPs that are fighting one another in order to get their prices down, you've also got a wholesale network, as we are, fighting to keep our prices down. And on our network, the ISPs are paying probably 20 to 30% less than the others.
I think that's the point. I think there's no easy answer to this, because whilst it is extremely frustrating and it does cause traffic congestion, have an impact on economic activity in the area, etc., as pointed out, it does help drive those prices down. It is part of the competitive market. So we have been round the houses on this one a few times, but there is no easy solution on it, really.
And the other gentleman.
Hi, my name is Antons. I'm originally from Baltic, from Latvia. Currently a businessman in London, so I moved to the UK quite some time ago, but that's not an interesting topic. So when coming to the fiber in Latvia, we have this rolled out a decade ago. And so when I moved to the UK, I was surprised to know that here this technology is still not present in many rural areas. So though the question is that considering that there is many technologies these days, wireless technologies like OneWeb technology or Starlink technology, why would the government invest the taxpayers' money into the fiber, which likely in 5 years would be the outdated technology?
Secretary of State, did you hear the rain?
So we are doing a combination. So in certain areas in the country, the really remote areas, we are utilising that satellite technology so that we can ensure that those areas are connected as well. And you're quite right. I don't know what year you came here, but when you came, you probably were taken aback, and we've not denied that fact. In fact, we said that we have to change this, and we have to make it a government priority, because connectivity, as we said at the very beginning of this session, is so vitally important, not just from an economic perspective, but a social perspective as well. And that's why we've made such progress in such a short space of time.
And Alan, as our resident Mr. Tech on the panel, could you point to any particular international examples that we should be following in this? If the UK is aiming to be, as we've all suggested, a science superpower and indeed a world leader in rolling this out, are there any particular other countries that have been particularly successful at it? Or are there any questions that we should be learning? Or are there actually any examples we should be following for countries that have, as the gentleman suggests, perhaps leapfrogged us in technological terms?
I probably don't have a direct answer to that, but one thing that I think is really important, which the gentleman has pointed out, is the fact is that we do really need to be focusing on future-proofing what we're doing here. And Secretary of State talked about the wireless infrastructure strategy. It actually is definitely worth your time. Perhaps not tonight, I'm sure you have something fun on, but it is really worth your time to really understand the technologies that are coming down the tracks through the likes of satellite technology. There's also spectrum strategy there, which is extremely important. It is long, it is not a page turner, but it is really, really important for understanding the way these technologies are going. And there are going to be so many other technologies that we are trying to become world leaders in, that we just won't be if we don't have the likes of 5G rolled out properly. So everything to do with like automated vehicles, but there's just so many out there, and we need to be sort of focusing on this from a future-proofing perspective. And I know that there's full fibre broadbands that we think that we perhaps have not got it fully right, but in order to get the, how would you say, we don't really want to be having all our towns being kind of turned up on the roads again and again. But for instance, like when we've got this full fibre broadband in the ground, Ed and I have been speaking about this before, where you can basically do like keyhole surgery into this in order to not have to turn up the road fully for this, which is going to be important, because when we do need to be able to increase the levels that we have, you need to be able to do that not in a way that completely means that we have to go back round through the entire country in order just to get ourselves connected up again. We need to be thinking 5, 10, 15, even 20 years down the road, and full fibre type broadband is the way forward there.
If I just may make the case for fibre, again, when I got this job, people said, oh yeah, but 5G's coming. But the reality is, for 5G rollout to happen, you're going to need a fibre infrastructure across the country in order to connect the small cells. So fibre is very, very important to the future. And as I said before, we've called our network future-proof already. We can get 10 gig speeds through it, and that's just based on today's technology.
Yes, and obviously future-proofing is another way of taking a long-term decision in the for a brighter future. So something that also I think we can all appreciate at the conference here today. Another set of questions. Can we have the gentleman towards the back here and the ladies sat there? So would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Anthony McKellar from Bedfordshire, a very rural part of the world that most people will probably know with the political event of a by-election there. During COVID, it's shown that the majority of our households had a bit of what you call digital inequality. And I just wondered, with BT's announcement of every household should have internet by 2025 in order to, bridge that digital and inequality, I just wondered if the scope of understanding could be elaborated a bit more from the Secretary of State. Thank you.
Can we have a response to that from the Secretary of State? And Rocky, I think also it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that. But before that, Lainey, is the microphone on? I hope this isn't a connectivity issue. That would be quite embarrassing. Yes, sorry. Madam, if you can take this sort of brief pause from the rain.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. I won't shout. Catherine Collins from Openreach. So we are the largest full fibre builder in the UK. But just to the point on technology, I totally back up Ed in the sense we're putting 12 billion into our 25 million fibre build. There is no way we would be doing that unless we see the benefits in putting in a UK-wide full fibre network. Satellite is still very expensive. It'll still be a bit unreliable. It'll be very good for the final few percent, we think. Same with fixed wireless. So fundamentally, full fibre is going to be the thing that I think underpins a lot of the sort of future productivity that we see going forward. But I wanted to pick up on some of the things you were talking about barriers, Ed, and also thinking about some of the challenges coming forward. I think one of the things that we're worried about is, well, we're all building at scale. We are building to a certain extent in some of the easiest areas. We've got Project Gigabit, which is going to try and help us in the rural areas. But I think we're concerned about digital divide, and we're starting to see digital divide in urban areas as well. So interested in the sort of thoughts around how we tackle those urban areas. I know there's been some conversation around BDUK potentially doing some work in urban areas, potentially using vouchers there. But we also have the issue that we've talked a lot about, which is trying to get into small blocks of flats, sort of Victorian conversions. Those are really tricky to try and get way leaves for, and it's very cost inefficient if you're trying to get a way leave from someone just for 4 properties, potentially in a conversion. And so we've had some legislation that is making it easier, in particular to access land, but I think our concern is we might still end up with those areas of digital divides, in particular in cities, and just wondering if we can take more evidence potentially around the MDUs, and if we feel we need to do more, whether we can push further on the legislation.
Thank you. We'll take that in a second, but Ed and the Secretary of State, I think it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on it. But first, Rocky, can you respond to the gentleman's question?
I think that it's probably better to the Secretary of State to start one.
Okay.
It was about the project that the government was doing.
Yeah, so I was just going to say on this digital divide thing, I think the whole project really is about squeezing the numbers, isn't it? Until eventually you've got nothing left, and then you start again because of the advancements. And when it comes to the legislation that we introduced the PTSI bill, which does exactly what you just said on way leaves and tries to remove some of those barriers so that we can get into those HMOs, that we can try and tackle some of the issues that we've seen around landlords, etc., and not replying. And so we've been trying to work with industry to overcome some of these barriers. There are some left, absolutely. And I guess what I'm saying here is that our commitment as government is that we're going to work with you to try to continue to remove those barriers so that we can not be in a situation where we've got digital inequality in the future, because this is a critical technology for us. It's one of only 5. It is absolutely imperative that we lean right into it, that we make a success of this, and that we're not lagging behind other nations, because otherwise we won't reach our goal of being a science and tech superpower. And then on the other point of the gentleman that comes from Bedfordshire, so there is you can go online and see exactly where you are in the process for getting gigabit. And we've obviously spoken a great deal about the BDUK programme here today, and also the Shared Rural Network programme for mobile connectivity. But my special advisors can point you to the exact URL afterwards.
Splendid. Rocky, would you like to add anything to that? Or?
Well, just to endorse the point that we need to make sure that everyone in the UK have access to a good connection, and that not only include having access to the service, but being able to afford the service. At the moment, we have a voluntary scheme of social tariff for those people in the lowest income. We need to make sure, but at the moment the take-up of those people that qualify for that is only 5%. We need to make sure that we reach all these people that are unable to afford a good connection, to make sure that they have it, because otherwise you are excluded from society. But everything is digitalized, including public services. Thank you.
Splendid. And Ed, did you have anything to add to... I won't mention the particular figures, but of course, I think we've learned from some panels so far that competition is important. So,
yeah. I think again, like when the government and talking about the digital divide, I mean, there was a lot of pressure on the government to talk about social tariffs and a lot of pressure from voters to basically say, government, help us with this. I think actually the beauty of what's happened in the UK is the building of competing networks, fighting for better, lower prices at the wholesale level, but then also at the retail level via the ISPs, is actually going to ensure into the short, medium and long term actually lower prices. And I think that's going to be a huge sea change in the way people consume their fixed connections in the UK. As I say, we've just finished phase 1 of this. Phase 2 is really bedding down people taking up these technologies. I think, again, like we were great supporters of the government in the recent Product Security Telecoms Infrastructure Act, which, again, looked at some of the challenges to roll out. And, again, MDUs, multiple dwelling units was a point being pushed by some in the industry. But I think, again, we agreed with the government the way to tackle this is not to basically grant telecom providers more power than the police to go into premises and start drilling through walls. What we wanted to do was work with landlords, and again the government created an alternative dispute resolution scheme, which I think we've had our first case go through, and it worked incredibly well.
Very good to hear. Do we have some more questions from the audience? The gentleman there. And do we have any others? Or, well, we'll see if this brings any. So.
Hello. Oh, there we go.
There we
Brilliant.
go.
Thank you. So I'm James Fredrickson. I'm from a network operator called Vorbos. So absolutely not the largest or second largest, far from it. It's a network infrastructure dedicated to central London. And the reason why I wanted to just add a question here that shifts the debate a little, we've heard a lot about the consumer and the small business benefit of gigabit-capable infrastructure. But at the absolute other end of the spectrum, we now have some businesses and emerging industry that require far more than that. So rather than gigabit capable, it's terabit capable. So the Vorbos network is targeted just to that end of the market. It can deliver a speed of 400 gigabits a second, and it can go higher, but the problem is the CPE equipment to actually make that useful doesn't actually exist yet. So there's a whole range of different demands in R&D, in companies developing ways of protecting their cybersecurity algorithms from not being blown up by advances in AI and quantum. And they're desperate for infrastructure that's terabit capable. And the current procurement rules in the UK are still kind of looking at the gigabit debate. So in light of these emerging technologies and the emerging threats that come with them, does this panel think there is a potential benefit in looking at the current rules we have around procurement and focusing on security integrity in our critical infrastructure and refreshing them in light of this emerging need?
Ed, I see you sort of nodding your head very vigorously there, so would you like to...
No, again, in terms of like James, the company James works for is very B2B focused, but I think, again, there was a great sort of intervention, as it were, with the Telecom Security Act, and I know that we've put a lot of work internally ensuring that we comply with that. Again, it's slightly easier for us. We're a brand new network built from scratch, so we're not having to sort of look over the legacy equipment. Everything's been installed quite recently, and with that in mind. So security we take very seriously, but isn't a problem on our network.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, absolutely, what we want to be doing, of course, is giving industry certainty and so they know the rules of the road. But at the same time, the only way we're going to become a tech and science superpower is if we're agile and we're nimble and we adapt, because we're talking about technologies that are advancing extremely fast. So as a government, we need to be responsive. And sometimes that means we need to be proactive as well as reactive. And these are areas that we are looking at and thinking about.
Splendid. Alan, did you have any thoughts on?
No, not really. Actually, do you know, I'd love to chat with you after this, James, about some of these things because I've not even dug into like what type of like technologies are going to need this terabit capable data. So I'd love to dig into that a little bit more because it sounds super interesting, and these are the things that we should be thinking about right now. I mean, I don't know how much the technologies that you're dealing with right now is things that are happening right now, or if it's sort of planning and R&D for things that might come off down the tracks. But regardless, whether it is things that are sort of deep tech, we don't quite know if it's going to come off or not, we should be thinking about this right now and making sure that we've got the infrastructure there in case these technologies come off. So yeah, I'd love to learn more, James.
Splendid. Therefore, Conor Home, a forum for bringing people together. Sorry, the gentleman, I apologise for missing the first time around.
Yeah, it's okay, yeah. My name's Alistair Mark. I'm the Director General of the Blockchain and Climate Institute. So actually, I would like to go back on the issue of use cases. I can't agree more about the importance of developing use cases. But in our experience working with so many countries at the UN level, we try to develop use cases in local contexts. So now, while over 60 local councils, including some conservative councils, are under financial stress, we will probably think about developing these use cases, digital connectivity use cases around the digitalization of council services, so that while the central government do not need to put more money into the council, while they can take this opportunity to revitalize the way in which they provide the council services, like the waste collection system, community energy trading, etc. These are the use cases that are increasingly common in the EU and many other even developing countries. So, it is also the basis on which we build up the councils, the public, or even our own parties' digital literacy. Digital literacy is not just about being able to use your smartphone, some apps, or Facebook, or other social media. It's about using these digital.
Sorry to cut across there, but we are slightly tight for time. So if we could sort of move towards a question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I'm wondering whether the governments could work with all the other government departments to contextualize the use cases of all those digital connectivity here.
Secretary of State, that seems directed towards...
Yes, yeah. So in many ways, we are doing that with our 5G innovation zones. And we've dedicated £40 million to that. There'll be 10 areas, then we'll be announcing exactly which areas later this year. So that's very exciting. And it does a lot of what you're saying about bringing that real focus and that synergy between the different bodies and organisations in these areas.
I think we might have time for one more quick question, if anybody has one. No, I mean, we've successfully addressed most of your concerns, ladies and gentlemen. That's very good to hear. Now, could I first have from Ed and the Secretary of State just a sort of summation of what we've discussed today? Because I think we've touched upon a lot of issues, actually. We've looked at it from the perspective of the consumer, we've looked at it from the perspective of infrastructure, and also from the terms of taking long-term decisions for a brighter future, in the sense of wanting to build Britain into this particular science superpower. So, as I say, Ed and then the Secretary of State, just to round us up.
Yeah, I think we've all been in violent agreement that there's been huge success in the UK in basically connecting people to future-proof networks. I think the thing I'd leave the room with, although we've reached 77% of coverage, it's going to be new problems that are going to be facing the industry, and also problems for the government and the regulator to tackle, particularly around take-up, which will unlock the further investment to continue to build. I think the one thing we'd ask the government to do is work with industry to help raise the awareness of this technology that is now at millions of people's front doors that they're not quite accessing yet. And I think, again, if we could get some help, and although we've heard some good news on flexi permits, if the government could, I know you've been a losing battle for legislation before the next Parliament, but again, if we can get further progress on flexi permits, I think that's something the rest of the industry would really, really thank you for.
So I think a lot of the themes of what's been coming out today is very much that this has been a successful collaboration between business and government. And that's why it's worked so well. That's why we've managed to achieve so much in such a short space of time. So that's really the ingredients that we need to have going forward as we double down and as we look to the future and try to future-proof some of this, but continue to invest and ensure that we're not facing areas with digital divide, etc. And if we are going to become a technology and science superpower by 2030, then we are really going to have to address some of the issues that have been raised today head on, like take-up, and also like understanding, and like making sure that the language is set across the board and that we've got consistency. And then we've got to continue as a government doing what we've been doing by listening to industry and trying to remove some of those barriers, like we did with the PTSI bill and like we've been doing with the pilot on roadworks. So we will continue to take that approach.
Splendid. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending today, and please could you have a hand for our panellists.